Welcome to the United Nations Office to the Special Advisor to Africa webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about STEM and the African Continental Free Trade Agreement Protocol on the Free Movement of Persons. My name is Winifred Ereyi. I am the CEO of ThinkSTEM Foundation, where our focus is on building the minority female tech talent pipeline by connecting girls to a community and to resources so that they can break free from the barriers to pursuing STEM careers. Joining me and my colleagues, fellow members of the STEM working group, Dr. Beatrice Njenga, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome, Dr. Beatrice Njenga. It's good to have you here. Dr. Beatrice Khamati Njenga is currently the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Institutional Advancement at the International Leadership University in Kenya. She was head of Education Division at the African Union Commission for many years until her retirement in 2019. During this time, she established, developed, and managed the African Union's Continental Education Program, covering all African Union member states, working with African ministries and institutions responsible for all levels of education and relevant officials in regional economic communities in articulating African common positions in education development, which includes STEM education. During that time, she also coordinated the development and implementation of the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, also known as CISA, 2016 to 2024, and previously the Plan of Action for the Second Decade of Education for Africa, within the time frame of 2006 to 2015. Both of these promote STEM education. She also has a series of notable achievements which you can find on the UN OSA's website. Dr. Njenga is keen to see that education development ensures inclusive access, quality, relevance, and responsiveness to contribute to attainment of the knowledge, skills, values, and mindsets required for attaining the hashtag Africa We Want, driven by competent African leaders of integrity as an influential force in the global community. It's good to have you here, Dr. Beatrice Khamati Njenga. Next, we will have Mr. Martin Bwalya. Welcome, Mr. Martin Bwalya. Mr. Martin Bwalya is the Director, Knowledge Management and Program Evaluation in the African Union Development Agency, also known as the AUDA-NEPAD. His responsibility covers three core functions in AUDA-NEPAD, namely knowledge management, program evaluation, and managing AUDA-NEPAD's 5 centers of excellence, which are charged with specialized research, analysis, and knowledge support in fields including science, technology and innovation, human capital development, food systems, and environmental climate change, as well as industrialization. Mr. Martin Bwalya is a machinery design and machine management engineer. Since 2000, he has worked in several international organizations in the field of development in general, and agriculture, food systems, and nutrition and climate change in particular. He has extensive experience in research and development, science, technology, and innovation, foresight, analytical work in the development and public policy fields across national, regional, and global political, economic interests and priorities. It continues to serve in varying responsibilities in international initiatives and programs. You can find detailed information about Mr. Martin Bwalya on the UNOSA website. This is just a summary. It's good to have you here, Mr. Martin Bwalya.
Thank you.
Joining me next is Professor Francisca Nneka Okeke. Professor Francisca Nneka Okeke is a professor of physics at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and the director of ICCSEE-UNN. UNN is an abbreviation for University of Nigeria, Nsukka. She is a laureate of L'Oreal UNESCO 2013 for Women in Science for Physical Sciences, Fellow of the World Academy of Science, Africa Academy of Science, Nigerian Academy of Science, Japanese Society for Promotion of Science. She's a trailblazer. The first female head of Department of Physics and Astronomy from 2003 to 2006. The first female dean, Faculty of Physical Sciences from 2008 to 2010. The first female indigenous professor in the Faculty of Science and Engineering of the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and the first female professor of physics in the eastern part of Nigeria. She has contributed immensely to the development of physics at both secondary and tertiary levels in Nigeria and has conducted many workshops, both locally and internationally. She has written a number of physics textbooks and articles that have enhanced the teaching and learning of physics at both secondary and tertiary levels in Nigeria. She has also written many articles that have encouraged girls and women to study physics in Nigeria and Africa at large. Professor Francisca Nneka Okeke is a well sought out international speaker on STEM education, amongst other topics. CNN celebrated her in 2015 in their African Voices for her numerous achievements and contributions to sciences. In 2016, the Nigerian academia celebrated her as one of the 10 most influential Nigerian women in science. In 2016, the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, recognized her as one of the top 10 most outstanding lecturers in research and publications. You are welcome to this discussion, Professor Francisca Okeke. So, Professor Francisca Okeke, can you check your audio? We cannot hear you. So yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
It's very good to have you here. Thank you. So, Professor Francisca Okeke, head of all your distinguished accomplishments in the world of STEM. And so my question to you is that why is STEM education important for African sustainable development and global competitiveness within the context of market liberalization?
Oh, thank you very much. I will first start by saying that we can see that from a recent rise in global technological industries, investment in STEM education will drive the socio-economic development of Africa faster than we can even think. We have seen that STEM education as an approach to learning and human development, and which binds the basic science, research, and education in all non medical fields such as mathematics, computer, social sciences, and for a common goal, and they reduce all forms of trade barriers among all Africans, particularly in this small continent. We also see that in Europe, the European Union liberalizing electricity and gas, while for ECOWAS, they liberalize movement and trade among member countries. Therefore, STEM we have to enhance and formulate policies, curriculum, choice that we favor the study of science, technology, mathematics in schools across of African countries for the following achievements or achievable sustainable development: workforce development, national security, migration policy, African science development, and other new discoveries. So also, when we talk about STEM, its role in this liberalization of trade or in Africa, it also develops solution and innovation we need in Africa across a range of life, supporting fields like health, food production, which leads to food security, basic infrastructure, environment, and what have you. We know that it also promotes creativity, it cultivates problem solving skills, encourages teamwork and collaboration. It gives people the skill that makes them more employable and ready to meet the current labor demand. It entails a whole range of experience and skills. Science provides learners an in-depth understanding of world around them. That is why we agree that Africa non-advancement in science, technology, and innovation is due to lack of STEM education. Therefore, STI and STEM gaps the gaps that has been created with the rest of the world needs to be closed with application of right set of scale to expand both extra and intra-African trade anticipated by the African Continental Free Trade Area. We cannot go away without now saying what actually STEM has done, because if you provide innovation and then creates creativity, skills, and what have you, it has a lot to do with that's our continent, Africa, trying to liberate the current situation. And because we have so many things that have been bothering us, we have now decided, I think 2019, in Kigali, Rwanda, that we come together and build up this, what we call this African Continental Free Trade Area, which will help us to at least not only, like I said, that the STEM will bring teamwork and collaboration. Teamwork and collaboration is not only when we are doing our research. In this trading, African coming together, it has a lot. It has created critical thinking, and the thinkers are around, increasing science literacy, and enables the next generation of innovators. So, of course, we know that innovation leads to new products and processes that sustain our economy. Both depends on the solid knowledge based on the STEM areas. And when we say this, we note that it is not only when we're talking about research or lab work that we now say we talk about STEM. No, it is not, because the STEM will enhance and formulate policies and curriculum that will lead us through in this our continent. And that is why I'm even very happy that this AfCFTA is coming up, has come up, not is coming up. It has already been launched. The most important thing is now, how do we, because one thing is we have these wonderful, lofty ideas, but implementation, full implementation has always eluded us. I'm sorry to say that. But with this, what we are doing now, trying to see the link between the STEM and the African Continental Free Trade Area, also with STI, Science, Technology, and Innovation, you can see that without, we will be thinking that it will take too far before we get there. I can see we are already moving and we are getting there in no due time. Because when we link all this and also come to think about the innovation, because science, technology, and innovation, science, technology, mathematics, and engineering, they all bind together in one way or the other. And that is why when we talk about nations and we talk about their development, what actually we need, because you can see that this term is leading us to social, economic, and environmental. You see, we are talking about development. If it is not sustainable development, it is not development. And
Can
it
you
is
hold that thought? Hold that thought, Professor Francisca. Let me dive a bit deeper. Hold that thought. Let's dive a bit deeper into what you have talked about, because you've talked about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and areas, and really how STEM education is going to be used, how STEM education can be used to promote, how AfCFTA, the other way around, how AfCFTA can be used to promote STEM education. So let's dive a bit deeper. Let's look at what AfCFTA is about, and let's look at its goals, its objectives, and let's look at how STEM education can leverage AfCFTA, and AfCFTA can be used to promote STEM education. So, Martin Bwalya, can you join this conversation and give us a high-level view of what AfCFTA is about? And I want you to keep your focus on talking about its goals and its objectives. Martin, thank you for joining this conversation.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that question. Let me build upon what my colleague has just been saying. And obviously, when you go into literature, you're going to find many definitions, descriptions, what is the CFTA. But let me try to put it in very basic language, especially that we want to communicate not just to experts, but people in general. CFTA, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, is one of the 13 flagship programs of the African Union Development of the Agenda 2023 of the African Union. And this is important to understand because it means that it's an integral part to a bigger program, a bigger, a greater good that the continent is striving towards. Now, when we have said that, then we specifically come and say, then what is actually the CFTA, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement? Is actually, in simple terms, you'd say, is three things. It's markets, number one, and I'm not putting them in any order. It's trade, number two, and in industry, number three. And it's about how these three actually interact, connect to generate value and therefore impact on the center, what is at the center of these three, which is people. So these three, trade, markets, and industry, have to interact, generate value that enhances the livelihood of people and of our societies. And this is important. That's why you find that in the CFTA, actually, one of the critical goals of the CFTA is actually about lifting over 30 million people out of poverty directly by 2035. And in that time, the CFTA hopes to generate well beyond $450 billion in additional incomes in terms of GDP, which is an increase of about 7% to where we were when we started 2019. So this is it. It's actually trade, markets, and industry with people in the center. The CFTA has got a number of protocols that are meant to be the areas where action is taken to achieve that goal of the CFTA. One, of course, is the trade in goods, trade in services, is investments, is also an issue of intellectual property rights, and it's about competitive policy. And actually, when you look at this last one, competitive policy, is also acknowledging that it is about generating wealth and trade and markets within the continent, and thereby actually enabling the continent to retain this wealth and impacting on then the livelihoods of the people of Africa, because you can generate wealth and impact on the rest of the world. But this is more about retaining that. But the competitive protocol also acknowledges that that market, trade, and industry is not operating in isolation. It's actually within the global economy, and therefore Africa has to consider elements of competitiveness across the rest of the world in terms of economies, industries, markets, and trade. And as at now, this is my third point, and I'll come to zero in on the objectives. But in terms of where we are with the CFTA, we actually have, since 2019, 54 countries have signed up on the CFTA protocol. And 44 have ratified, which means that they've actually embraced it within their legal framework as actually an instrument for engaging on trade, markets, and industry in the continent. I also want to mention here that, of course, there has been a lot of engagement on the issues of trade and markets. But as we speak, actually, in another 2 weeks, the continent is having an extraordinary summit on industrialization in Niamey, Niger, which is an important part of what the continent is actually doing in advancing this triangle of trade, markets, and industry. Now, let me speak a little bit, actually, and I'm not going to cover all the objectives, but just to highlight a few that relate to the subject of STEM, and I'll zero in on STEM and finish there. So the point is that there are actually about 7, 8 key general objectives of the CFTA. Now, I pick up 4 or 5 of them. One is to create a single market for goods and services. And this objective underlines that this creation of single market for goods and services is going to be facilitated by movement of people. So the element of movement of people is a critical part of the success of the CFTA, and of course the impact of CFTA on livelihoods and economies in the continent. Second is the creation of liberalized market within the continent. Third is movement of capital and the persons, as I said. Fourth is actually the CFTA provides the foundation for the establishment of the Continental Customs Union. And I'm sure we'll appreciate that. And I did mention earlier about competitiveness is actually one of the critical objectives of the CFTA. And I'm going to underline that the element of STEM is critical in actually building competitiveness, because other continents, other countries may have just as well resources and everything, but it's about how you apply in terms of intellectual assets, in terms of skills, competences, and the whole efficiency, effectiveness of the system that will allow for that competitiveness. And lastly, as I mentioned, is the issue of industrial development, which is one of the key objectives of the CFTA. Now, when you look at these objectives, you actually appreciate one of the fundamental principles of Agenda 2033, which is the fact that apart from financing, apart from the natural resources that the continent have, one of the critical resources the continent has to harness to manage, to drive, to catalyze sustainable, viable development, which is result-oriented and impacting on the livelihoods, that resource is knowledge. And the knowledge in the form of intellectual assets, in terms of science, in terms of information, that is critical in terms of enabling the continent to manage or build a capacity to generate that resource or to manage the CFTA. And this is where you find actually the interface between the CFTA and STEM education. And as actually was mentioned, it's about the value of STEM in propelling, in enabling advances in the CFTA. And you can actually close the loop. When the CFTA is succeeding, it will actually be pulling and generating more effort, more resource into STEM. So it's actually a mutual relationship between STEM, a success in STEM, and success in the CFTA. And as I said, coming back to the point, the issue, the critical resource to advance STEM and to advance the CFTA implementation is the quality, the relevance, is the appropriateness of knowledge, which actually connects then to what are we doing as a continent in building that knowledge, the science, the intellectual assets. And there you see that actually education in STEM sits at the center of generating these narratives, this knowledge, this science that is not just science knowledge, is actually enabling, is appropriate, and is fostering for the continent's development agenda. And this is why I'll come back, moderator, later on to talk about specifically what are the countries doing actually as we speak in terms of fostering the application, implementation of the CFTA and those things specifically that relate to, at the same time, embracing the value of STEM. I stop here.
Thank you so much, Martin Bwalya. I could not write fast enough. There were just so many nuggets there. And thank you so much. That was really, really deep, but not too deep. And so that was really, really good. Thank you. I would like to add Dr. Beatrice Khamati Njenga to this conversation to add, my apologies if I butchered your name. I hope I did it. I hope I got it right because I did practice. But I would like to add you to the conversation. Martin has talked about 3 pillars. He talked about industry, he talked about market, and he talked about people and trade. And he said that at the center of that was people, and that really the focus of the agreement was really to generate value. And so can you kind of expand on this and tell us how STEM education, I've read your bio of all the amazing work that you have done with STEM education continent-wide and the CISA. So tell me, how can STEM education help AfCFTA achieve its objectives and vice versa? Over to you, Dr. Beatrice.
Thank you so much for that question. Your pronunciation is just fine.
Thank you.
You'd be amazed how we mispronounce so many things, but I think it's within the acceptable limits. As my colleague, Mr. Martin Bwalya, has very well introduced the place of STEM in the continental free trade area. This free trade area involves movement, as you've said, of people, of goods, and of services. And immediately one thinks of experts, traders, producers, consumers. So, of course, education is key. If the free trade area is to be people-centered, as Mr. Bwalya has suggested, and if it's to benefit our people optimally, but also if the free trade area itself has to benefit from the people through their skills, attitudes, and dispositions. So STEM knowledge and skill are indispensable to what the CFTA is about, as Bwalya has introduced. Think of innovation, industrialization, manufacturing with value addition that are necessary to make intra-African trade meaningful. Even when you think of consumers, we talk of the market. Is it 1.3 billion people? But consumers are not just consumers because they make up the numbers. We need also discerning consumers. As our manufacturing is enhanced and we have more science and technology content in goods and services, you also need a basic STEM literacy in the general population so that they are able to appreciate some of these goods, to be sufficiently tech savvy in order to provide the needed market and actually patronize the new value-added services and technology products. And that kind of a consumer base would also be very important and useful in provoking innovation, because innovation happens all the time, but it's also about identifying problems and suggesting solutions that are commensurate with the people's knowledge, understanding, and as well as situation. So that STEM literacy is very important. So we can see STEM at different levels. So STEM education and collaboration in STEM education will benefit much from the free trade area, as they are the key ingredients of success and growth of the free trade area. And though education and STEM provide context for collaboration, yet these, I would hasten to add, should not be treated as commodities like the other tradable goods and services. This is as far as commoditization implies subjection to market forces, which means you're providing according to people's ability and capacity or desire to pay. But education is a human right, and therefore you cannot limit its provision to market forces and capacity to pay. So education must be, its place must be negotiated, education and STEM, to make sure that that we are not left behind. We are not leaving our populations behind if we make it a tradable commodity as we open up the markets, because that would be contrary to provision of education as a human right. Now, looking at STEM, if you look at the countries that are participating in the piloting of the trading, Kenya, Cameroon, Egypt, Rwanda, and Tanzania, okay, I'd just like to consider the products that have been chosen by Kenya for export. They include Exide batteries, textiles, vehicle filters, and farm produce. And all of these require relatively high input of STEM skills, especially if you're going to produce at the level that these goods and services will be appreciated across the board, across the borders, so that those who have been importing from outside Africa will be happy to import from within. And so with the Continental Free Trade Area, the context, the political and social context is catching up with policy. We have discussed before how our countries, the countries across Africa, have national STEM education policies that seek to link STEM knowledge and skill to industry. So implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area helps to make sense of this. So this kind of policy makes better sense under the Continental Free Trade Area, with expanded markets, expanded need for the skills that we get through STEM education. As member states rally towards strengthening Made in Africa, that's part of the, shall I say, a motto, one of the mottos in the CFTA. STEM becomes more urgent and relevant, and mobility of STEM professionals becomes key, whereby the STEM intellectual capital and human capital can become a shared resource across the continent, because we know that the different countries are at different stages in implementation of STEM, in production of STEM-based experts and resources. If we have opened the space, it means even such resources now become available for more of the countries. Over the last 2 decades, the AU and African education agencies, including AUDA-NEPAD, of course, have been collaborating to build an African higher education area. And so it's as if, okay, it's not a coincidence, because all these ideas of free trade area, free education and science area have been around since the introduction or the beginning of Pan-African thought. But this African higher education area, or African science and technology area, provides a foundation for collaborative research, for industrialization and manufacturing. So it will be necessary to expedite common standards and mutual recognition of qualifications, which enables skills portability and credit transfer, because it would beat the purpose of free mobility if a professional moves and then they have to begin afresh to acquire the skills that would be required in that new country. It has to be from the beginning that the qualifications from one country are recognized in another country. So we seem then to be talking of open science. STEM is important in promoting open science. Open science, because it's so important and useful across the board for what we need to do in the continental free trade area. And as Professor Francisca talked about at the beginning, just for human life in general. But then there is also the question of rewarding the innovator or the originator of this knowledge. So the issue of intellectual property comes in. And I know this will be dealt with in phase 2 of implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area. So these are the areas within which STEM can help to promote the Continental Free Trade Area, and the Free Trade Area also provides opportunity for building STEM. I talked about shared resources and collaboration. So the regional STEM centers that have been under development over the last 2 decades or so, the research centers in agriculture, like Ruforum does a lot of work in promoting agricultural research and promoting networking across African universities. All these are going to become even more relevant, and hopefully, as more money comes out of the free trade area, we hope to get more money going into STEM education. About 15 years ago, African countries are committed to invest at least 1% of GDP in scientific research. But so far, very few countries are even approaching that 1%. But now the free trade area is an opportunity to make those resources available, even for teachers, for instance. Africa in general is short of teachers, but especially in STEM education. So teacher mobility that might be enhanced by the instruments that are going to improve professionals moving from one country to another. Teacher mobility should be part of that, and it would make it possible for those teachers who are generated in one country and are not yet in the classroom to be available more readily for other countries in Africa. And indeed, it has been like so even at the regional economic community level. If you look at the SADC, Southern Africa Development Community, its Vision 2050 and its Regional Indicative Strategic Plan 2020 to 2030, as well as the East African Science, Technology and Education Commission, the ECOWAS Protocol, and you can go around Africa, those in the groupings of nations. They were already placing STEM education, skills, portability as key instruments for promoting regional integration. And now with the continent opening up, it can only get better as we spread those collaborations that are already happening within the regions, now to spread them across Africa.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness. That was I was just making notes, and that was really very insightful. When I look at what Martin and yourself have shared, there are three things that come to me. Global competitiveness. Because the innovation that is powering the fourth industrial revolution all over the world is based on STEM, is based on strong scientific principles, is based on cutting edge technology, is based on engineering, applied engineering, and strong mathematical skills, which is all about STEM. So when you talk about AfCFTA, I call it AfCFTA, CFTA. When you talk about CFTA, really enabling Africa to become globally competitive. That is something that stands out right there. That we want Africa to be able to solve their own challenges. We have a lot of challenges, and STEM education will help us solve those challenges. But in addition to that, we want collaborative research so that Africa is globally competitive. I would like to bring Martin back into this conversation, because Martin and you have kind of expanded and talked about. Martin talked about industry, he talked about market, he talked about trade, he talked about the different objectives and the goals. And you Dr. Beatrice, you've really dived deep to really talk about why movement of people to this free continental area where trade of goods and services we really help to help Africa achieve the sustainable development goals. So Martin, tell me, what are countries currently doing? What are current countries currently doing, to make this a reality? So what structures and systems have they put in place to make what you have shared with us a reality?
Yeah.
Over to you, Martin.
Thank you so much. And indeed, important question, because again, the issue is, in terms of this conversation, is what can we do more or differently to advance that mutual reinforcing effort between STEM and the CFTA. My colleague talked about consumers, and I think it's important to underline that. It also goes with the issue I mentioned about people in the center, because it's also an element of education. And when we talk about people, you also recognize that there actually has been a time in Africa's economic growth and development trajectory or pathways when the continent was growing at a very good GDP rates compared to the rest of the world. But what was strikingly noted there was the impact on the people, which was next to zero. And this is why the element of consumers of people is not just a by the way, is actually effort that needs to be made to make that happen. That is why when we talk about the CFTA creating value, is about deliberately looking at commercial value, which is, as you said, moderator, linking to the markets and all that. But there has to be also deliberate effort to look at what about the social value. And the two of them have to be measured such that the net outcome is a positive impact on the people. And this is why the first area where countries are working is actually on public policy. And when we talk about tariffs, we talk about customs, subsidies, even protection measures. There has to be some policy regime that is actually helping the country to deliberately ensure that the value being generated is transformed to impact on the people's needs. And I'm trying to emphasize here that this doesn't happen by itself. It needs some very deliberate efforts in terms of policy, in terms of investments to make it happen. Excuse me. This is what you find excuse me. This is what you find actually, there is some effort now, and this has been actually augmented, fostered by the experience with COVID, when we had to go into some stimulus measures, some social protection measures, safety nets in that context. And most countries have recognized that you need some environment that provides for resilience in terms of the socio-economic advances when you come into those shocks, but also in general. So we see countries actually beginning to pay more attention to looking at the whole microeconomic policies and environments to ensure public policy is supportive to ensuring that the value that would emerge out of the CFTA is actually as much as possible internalized to impact on the quality of life of people in form of consumers and users of technology. And that in itself will then translate into fostering more reason for the CFTA. And the more the CFTA succeeds, the more we're going to get effort into STEM succeeding in terms of the value, the rationale for why STEMs. The second one is about connection between education, trade, and industry. And we see this, a lot of this actually being championed from industry, because industry is more worried about where are the skills going to come from to get the competitiveness that you are referring to, Moderator, for them to remain viable. And therefore, there is continuous effort between public and private sector, business in terms of connecting between skills, vocational training centers, universities, and industry through efforts such as interns and the attachments to ensure that there's actually link and impacting not just on the modalities for training, but also on the curriculum that is going on. And these are efforts that maybe are not far and wide enough, but they are actually sports where they're happening and happening successfully. And I'm mentioning them here because it's also about how do we get much more critical mass of effort in those kind of interventions. The third one is policy specifically related to aspects of intellectual property rights, related to investments, attracting investments, especially when Africa is looked at a very risky investment destination, but also the whole issue of competitiveness, because apart from technological efforts to improve competitiveness, there are also policy measures that governments have to lead. They may not be necessarily be the only one, but government has to provide leadership to actually get this enabling environment to advance STEM, and therefore STEM into the CFTA and the other way around. And the last point here in terms of what is happening actually in a very large way, and I mean those things that have direct implications on STEM vis-a-vis CFTA and the other way around, is the issue of skills and competencies. And I think has been mentioned, when you look at today and look at the emerging technologies, digitalization, artificial intelligence, machine learning, or impacting on the industries in form of e-commerce. And I'm sure you are hearing about industry without smoke, which is majorly the services. And these are actually economic activities that will generate value and wealth for the continent and impact directly on the ability of the continent to realize its objectives on the CFTA. And that ability to realize the goals of the CFTA depends, as my colleague mentioned earlier, on the quality of education, and especially in the context of education in STEM, because it's about science, it's about mathematics, it's about engineering, it's about the whole, today when you talk about the whole digitalization of systems, of products, that impact directly on the competitiveness and productivity. So these are a few I would mention of something that you see at broader than that than just national level. And I mentioned them because also my colleague mentioned the whole issue of regional continental efforts, because when you talk about knowledge, when you talk about STEM, actually the broader you go, the value it is. It's about the broader ecosystems of education systems, of schools, of universities, of industry, building a wider ecosystem. And the wider that is, the more value there is in knowledge and in the value of knowledge. I stop here.
So thank you for that. So let me dive a bit deeper into this question. When I said what are countries, I would like some specific examples. I mean, at least one country. Dr. Beatrice, when she talked about products that were being exported, she talked about the battery and the fact that in order to manufacture that battery, we need STEM education. And she talked about if that battery is going to be exported, we need people who can produce that battery. So I would like to know, thank you for what you've shared. Right now, can you give an example of a country that is really leveraging AfCFTA, the free movement of people, the AfCFTA protocol on the free movement of people, removing tariffs, allowing, Dr. Beatrice talked about skill portability, allowing skills to be moved from one region to the other, teacher mobility. Is there a country that you can spotlight that is currently doing something that is really leveraging that protocol? That question is for Martin. I want to dive a bit deeper. You've given us I want to zoom in because you kind of zoomed out and given us a broad view of all that is being done generally within the continent. But I really kind of want a country, is it South Africa, is it Kenya, that is really looking at that, where they are recognizing the certification from other countries. So is there a country that is currently using this the protocol in order to make Africa competitive? First of all, in order to make their country competitive, and by so doing, make the country. You can give an example.
Yeah, moderator, your question is clear.
Martin Bwalya.
Yes. Should I continue?
Yes, please. I was trying to pronounce your last name. Continue. My apologies.
Okay.
I'll get it right one day.
Yes. No, actually, what you're saying is important, and I want to acknowledge that as the African Union, we are looking at two things. One is what you may call activities that can be done today and probably disappear tomorrow, but we are also paying attention, and this is from lessons in the past. We are paying attention to building systems. When we look at capacity, when we look at impact, we are looking at what are emerging capacities in the form of systems that can then be grown, can be deepened as part of the ability of the continent to manage and sustain the CFTA and STEM. But when you look at what activities a country is doing, there are actually 101 of them, and you can take many of them. I'll give you an example. If you look at the movement of people, Rwanda is one country that is actually not just doing it, but institutionalized, legalized, the actually attracting of skilled manpower out of the rest of the continent into their own industry. And that is very formal, is established, and you see that in Rwanda. There are a few other countries that are considering that or making it much more easier to actually attract and leverage on skilled resource, intellectual assets across the continent. As we speak, when you look at Kenya, Kenya was mentioned in response to the COVID and especially the conflict in the disruptions on the food markets, global food markets. Actually, Kenya and a few other countries in the region are looking at the whole issue of regional reserves. And actually the building and not physically, the systems of regional reserve is actually being negotiated within the context of the CFTA. And this is an urgent issue that actually several countries are coming together, because to get it to be viable, then you have to go at regional level. And that is being actually done within the protocols of the CFTA to enact measures that allow food reserves that allows these countries to be much more resilient in the event of shocks. And that is also actually addressing the issue of some of the inputs like fertilizer. You also find within the facilitation of SADC, actually engagement between Zambia and Zimbabwe that are, as we speak, working on the industrial free zone that connects between the two. And this is based on the fact that analysis has been done about the size of markets and related to market development. And actually, Zimbabwe and Zambia are working on a joint effort to build an economic industrial zone in terms of tax rebates, customs incentives that will allow manufacture of certain commodities. These are mostly household commodities initially, as part of enhancing not just the trade, but also the industrial work in the countries. And this, again, is just possible because it's being discussed, negotiated within the context of the COMESA, SADC industrial trade protocols, supported and facilitated also through the CFTA. So you can go on, and there are several actually in West Africa, Ghana, for instance, also a number of very, very specific interventions that are actually, my colleague did mention, we're not talking about the CFTA today. This has been an issue, in fact, is the original rationale for the African Union. It was ultimately into one economy. But what we have seen in the last 3-4 years is actually unprecedented, and most countries are beginning to embrace that effort, that opportunity to actually address many things that they knew needed to be done, but didn't just have the platforms and the tools to get those things done. Over.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. One of the things that I really wanted to spotlight and highlight, so to highlight, is that the CFTA is not theoretical. That there's work being done at the, yes, you're talking of frameworks, talking of goals, objectives, and work being done on the continental level, but really on the local level, on the country level, that countries are really doing work, fostering agreements with each other where they are actually, there's portability of skills. Rwanda, you said Rwanda has legalized the people coming in from other countries within Africa to actually work there and share their resources with Rwanda. That means their intellectual property with Rwanda. So I really wanted to leave that for the listeners to hear that this is not theoretical. What people are actually implementing the CFTA. So I want to bring this conversation to a close, and I would just like one statement from everybody. I know we're running very short on time. Francisca, can you come back on to what is one lasting thought you would like to leave with the audience about STEM education and how STEM education can leverage AfCFTA, CFTA, I will let's call it AfCFTA, CFTA, and how STEM education can help AfCFTA achieve its objectives and vice versa. What is one word, one sentence you want to leave with the audience?
I would like to just comment that for this, as we have been saying, to be a reality, the AfCFTA and the STEM, we need to government to be very serious and implement all we have been saying here, because there is a serious problem which we have to face, and that will lead to social, economic, and environmental development, which invariably is sustainable development.
Thank you. Yes. Hold that thought. Can I have Dr. Beatrice back on? Dr. Beatrice Njenga. Dr. Beatrice Njenga, what is one last thought you would like to leave about how Martin, you go for it. Martin, you tell us. What is one last thought you would like to leave with the audience about STEM education and CFTA?
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Actually, for me, it's very, very clear that the CFTA provides the opportunity for us to showcase, to demonstrate the value of STEM. We are not going to be lobbying that STEM is important. We just have to show it and the CFTA is going to provide the resources to advance STEM because it will pay for the value. It will have to absorb and harness this value of STEM and therefore pay for it because the value will be demonstrated. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Dr. Beatrice, just one very quick one. We've run out of time, Dr. Beatrice. What's the one last thought you want to leave with the audience?
My one last thought with the rich discussion we have had and the core value of STEM education for the Continental Free Trade Area is that we need to do better to collect STEM data because we need to know our capacity and the capacity gaps so that we know where we are going to invest to make sure that STEM education really contributes to the Africa we want by facilitating the movements that are required in the Continental Free Trade Area. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So thank you so much for participating, for listening into this conversation. There are so many nuggets that have been shared. I think my lasting thought is that for Africa to be globally competitive, Africa needs to, STEM education is essential for Africa to be globally competitive. And the CFTA agreement is a tool that is going to be used to promote STEM education across Africa. So thank you so much for listening in. I'm looking forward to the next webinar that we're going to have on this topic. I see Martin wants to share something.
Moderator, just to urge OSA, and thank you for facilitating, organizing this discussion, but just to urge them that I think it would be useful to expand this conversation. Many of the constituencies are actually doing STEM and CFTA, but there's no direct awareness. So the more we can have this discussion broad and wide across the continent, the more we're going to leverage each other. So just urging to OSA to have more of this conversation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And it is very obvious that we have to have more of these conversations because I believe that awareness and action brings transformation so that, like you said, there needs to be no argument about why STEM education is important. So we need to bring this to an end, and we can definitely continue this conversation on another webinar series, seeing that we have run out of time. Thank you so much, OSA, for providing this opportunity for the STEM working group to educate the audience of why STEM education is very important and how STEM education can leverage the CFTA and in order to make Africa globally competitive. Thank you, everybody, for joining this conversation.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all and have a wonderful
Thank you, everybody.
evening.
Thank you.